Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Monticello live stream. I'm Melanie Holland, and I'm here today with my colleague Bill Barker, and he's going to be telling us some questions that he gets as the first person interpreter of Thomas Jefferson. And first of all, how many years have you been doing this?
A lifetime is what I usually answer in persona. However, Mel and folks, this has been 43 years that I have been in persona as Jefferson, not consistently throughout all that period, but certainly within the last 35 years, yes, consistently in persona as Jefferson.
That's fantastic. And we're thrilled to have you here at Monticello interpreting Thomas Jefferson.
Delighted to be here.
So come on site, come and visit. If you haven't seen Thomas Jefferson in person here at Monticello, we encourage you to come visit and see his appearances. But moving on to today's topic, some of the top questions that you get as Thomas Jefferson from adults and children. We have some different ones. So let's just jump right in. Like, what is one of the top questions that you get from people when you're interpreting Thomas Jefferson?
Well, I could start with one, and I have listed over the years a top 10. Over the years, when I first started doing this, the interpreting in persona as Jefferson at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and then following through to Colonial Williamsburg for the 27 years I was there, and now here at Monticello for going on 5 years. There are top 10. So would you like me to list the top 10 and then we zero in on one of those? I could start from the 10th and work my way up to the first and second, because the first and second kind of flip-flop with one and the other. And then I have the top 10 questions that are asked by children, which I think will be interesting. They're just slightly different from the questions that I've received from adults. What would you all care to have, how I should proceed?
Well, I guess I can weigh in on that. Let's start from the 10th and work our way up to the top question.
10th and work our way up to the question.
Let's do that.
All right, we will.
Oh, and I encourage the audience, if you have questions for Bill about interpreting Thomas Jefferson, leave them in the comments and we will answer them on air. Okay.
So the 10th of the top 10 questions, you may be interested to know, has become the more frequent as I am with the Monticello Foundation, and that is, do you love Sally Hemings?
Wow.
But this is in the top 10. The 9th, what do you consider your greatest accomplishment as president? The 8th, who has had the greatest influence in your life? The 7th, why did you send Lewis and Clark on the expedition? 6, what gave you the authority to purchase Louisiana? 5, why did you disagree with Alexander Hamilton? 4, are you and Mr. Adams still friends? 3, how long did it take you to write the Declaration of Independence? And then the top 2. And I, because they flip-flop. So let me just, it does not mean that the first one should preclude the second one and vice versa. So you wrote all men are created equal. Why do you own slaves? And what did you mean by separation of church and state? So those are the top 2 that I have received over 43 years interpreting Thomas Jefferson. Now, how about the children?
Yes, let's go for it.
Let's go right for the children, because this is interesting, what they ask about over these 40 years or so. Starting with the 10th, why don't you like Alexander Hamilton? And I'm saying that only because over the years, as you all may know, Hamilton was not so much in the picture in my interpretation of Mr. Jefferson until obviously the musical hit the scene. And now he really has become a staple question. The questions about Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson has certainly become a staple from children. And this quite frequently here at Monticello, let alone as it began to be asked at Colonial Williamsburg. 9, why did you send the Lewis and Clark expedition? They're from the children. 8, are you and Adam still friends? 7, what is it like to be president? 6, how long did it take you to write the Declaration of Independence? So here,
It's some
whether
overlap.
the children are coming up with this by themselves or whether their parents are encouraging them, these are still generally their questions. Number 5, do you have any brothers and sisters? 4, what is your favorite book? 3, what is your favorite food? 2, do you have any pets?
I was going to ask if kids
They,
ask that.
they ask, do you have any pets?
Yeah.
And 1, who is your best friend?
Aw, that's so sweet.
There it is.
But that tracks too with when we're delivering digital programs to kids, especially younger kids. They ask these type of questions. They want to know about his family. They want to know about the pets and his friends, because that's really what's important in their world.
And that's what's important in the world. They are there with their families. They are there with their friends. It's fascinating to meet the number of families here at Monticello. And as I ask the children, are you brothers and sisters? The many times they will say, well, he and I are brothers, or she and I are brothers and sisters, but this is my best friend, or these are my cousins. The number of family groups that we have visiting, and the number of family friends, or the number of homeschoolers that come here with their family and friends.
Oh, that's great. Well, I want to just go ahead and throw in a question from the audience, but I do want to dig into these questions too. But Chester would like to know if you could ask Mr. Jefferson one question. What would it be?
Oh, Chester. Firstly, thank you for remaining with us, Chester. It's always a pleasure to get your questions and a delight to answer them too. So you've got to introduce yourself if you're coming to visit Monticello. I'd love to chat with you in person, in persona. What would I like to ask Thomas Jefferson? I think I would like to ask him, what is his greatest respect, having been born and growing up in a wilderness? His greatest respect for the elements of nature, his greatest respect for his family, friends, the community, his fellow man. Because Mel and Chester, I think that being born and growing up in the wilderness, he was born and grew up on the fringe of civilization in his time, when there would have been no light pollution, when it would have been a 4-mile-an-hour world, where the enslaved families and the families of the masters were all living very much in close proximity together, where these families had actually known one and the other for more than one generation or so. I would like to ask him, where is the essence and depth of your respect for how you have grown up, what you have recognized at an early age to enable you to persevere and seek to correct things or to recognize contradictions and injustices in that, when you were born into something that you had no say in being born into. I think this goes for many of us. And it's the essence, is it not, of the Reverend Lawrence Stern's work, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy. This is what he is helping us understand about generations who have no say about what they are being born into. So I think I'm seeking, am I not, kind of a reconciling myself in what I do with what he might say, as I'm sure he felt this and had to reconcile it himself.
Yeah, and he was a very complicated figure. We would say that a lot. He's very complex. The things he says and writes about don't always match his actions. There's a lot to dig into, I imagine, when you're interpreting Thomas Jefferson too. So
and for all of us, Mel, I mean, you
mm-hmm.
come in contact with this every single day too, with what you have done here in so many ways, helping to interpret Monticello, helping to interpret this difficult man, helping to interpret that continually with the changing scenes in our nation and the world socially throughout all of the years too. And it's a great weight.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these questions, and maybe we'll just start with the ones that are the ones most asked of you, centering around religion and slavery, some of the big two controversial topics in America and in Jefferson's life too. How have you how do you answer a question like when people ask, he wrote, all men are created equal, yet he was a lifelong enslaver. How do you answer that in persona? Because it seems like it would be more difficult than if you were doing a third person interpretation.
Well, in persona, I try to stay in Jefferson's words. I try to stay in the context of his times. I think this is very, very important when you're putting on the costume, when you're putting on the persona, to keep that within its period. And I mean, what will they say about us 200 years from now is as relevant to Jefferson saying the same thing in his day. And so therefore, holding fast to that. All men are created equal. We know that, as Jefferson says, there is nothing new or original in the Declaration of American Independence. All of it has been written, argued, and debated before. You may find it in the elementary books of public right. So he has just not written the Declaration off the top of his head. It's founded in facts of the works of public right, the works of Aristotle, Cicero, Algernon Sidney, John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Paine. All of this has served as the oyster and the nucleus for how he is shedding the lofty sophisms of the ancient authors, explaining them in clear and simple terms. So, not to over-explain myself, but when he writes all men are created equal, he does, in my opinion, from reigning in his time, understanding that this was very much a part of the controversy of the intellectual mind and the social scene of the time, he means all mankind, that we're all born free in nature. And this is somewhat of a resuscitation of the Justinian Code of Law, the first civil body of law from the 6th century, written by Roman Emperor Justinian I. Everyone is born free. Everyone comes into this world with a right to their own person and the right to move wherever you choose to improve your condition. So that's where I start. And then I also approach in persona that Jefferson well understands, as our Declaration is divided into 3 parts. The first part being those first 2 sentences that are promoting we're all born free in nature, born with inalienable rights for every individual worldwide, not only for us as Americans, but the right to self-government, the right to equal and exact justice. The second part of the Declaration is a long litany of all of the grievances for which, as Englishmen in the colonies, they never received redress. So, and then the third part is the formalizing of the Declaration. That last line, in support of this Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. There's the oath. So my point, Jefferson knows well, we're all born free in nature, but we're born into the laws of man. There's the contradiction. Is there any hope? No, Jefferson, they're all questioning this. It's not only Jefferson. I mean, you're talking about Voltaire, you're talking about Rousseau, Montaigne, Montesquieu, Locke, Hobbes. You know, in Jefferson's opinion, yes, there's hope. In fact, our nation is a hope to rectify this. Is it going to happen overnight? No, it's not going to happen overnight. So we have to keep working at this. If the Declaration were law, well, within Jefferson's lifetime, let's say in the year of 23, if this is 1823, well, he's not going to see it. He's not going to see that rectifying. He's not going to see that further improvement. But does the hope remain? I think in his mind, decidedly the hope remains. Is he going to live to see this? No. But then when you realize in 1826, our nation will be 50 years old, 3 years from now, 2026 will be 250. Well, 50 years only sees 2 generations. So you wonder, you contemplate within that time, within that period, is 2 generations enough to make that great of a difference? We have 24 states, we have a population 9,600,000, and the franchise is held predominantly in the hand of the white male freeholder. So these are the things to bear in mind that I hold in interpreting the complicated and weighty implications of does the line "all men are created equal" provide us an answer to what we are continuing to go through?
Yeah, and when you answer too, keeping it within his time period, it's hard to bring it forward, you know? I mean, that's something as a challenge probably for you, because when we interpret the Declaration of Independence, or these, bigger ideas of liberty, freedom, self-governance, we're able to pull it forward in time, to talk about how those ideas have been used. The words of the Declaration have been used by others throughout history to try to forward their own. So,
Absolutely right. I mean, this is the conversation.
mhm.
It continues to be the conversation. It continues to be what we ought to be doing, in my opinion, and in Jefferson's opinion, as Americans.
Right. Mhm. Okay, well, we have a couple of audience questions. I want to get to a few of these. Sophia asks if you have a favorite memory of interpreting Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, I'm presuming, Sophia, you are Sophia from España, from Spain?
I don't know.
I don't know. I know we have a Sophia from Spain who visits with us frequently. Um, what is the greatest question I've received? Well, I will tell you what that is. I can never forget it. It was during the Iraq War, and I was interpreting Mr. Jefferson in Williamsburg, and a little girl came up to me and was tugging on my frock, and I couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, so I bent down and she said, Mr. Jefferson, what do I tell my brother who is going off to war?
Hmm.
And how do you answer that? I mean, here she is looking up at me as, in her eyes, suspending disbelief as Mr.
Mhm.
Jefferson. What do I tell her? And so I could only reach into the depths of my own concern and say that you are going to be with your brother, even though you are not there next to him physically, that you hope he will understand that you are with him and continue to support him and continue to provide him your love, that he is doing the right thing on behalf not only of our nation, which is his duty in that service, but particularly on behalf of his family and of you, saying that to the little girl. It's a very difficult thing when you're suspending disbelief to receive questions like that, and to know how to handle them. And again, that goes back to that word of respect for your fellow person and an understanding that we are all a family of man, and we're all struggling within our families to try and support one and the other, and our country as well in situations as we face now, no less as we did in the past with that war in Iraq.
Right. Wow. And that's weighty. I mean, that really is. It's quite a responsibility. Um, Maggie asks, who is Bill's favorite Jefferson family member, or who do you find most interesting outside of Jefferson?
Oh, my heavens. Who is my most favorite Jefferson family member? Maggie, we know in Jefferson's writings whom he seems to favor in his family. So in persona, I could easily answer that with respect to first and foremost his wife, of course, who he does not say much about, but when he does write something, it's pretty deep and profound. 10 years of uncheckered happiness. We know his great regard for his father, again, who is torn from him at a very early age. The father's only 49, Jefferson 14 when the father passes away. I think there's a great regard for Jefferson's mother. I think he has a great regard for her. Again, he does not leave us much about her in his writings. We know his sister Jane was probably the favorite of his siblings, but she passes away. She's only 20 years old. Lissa, his next eldest sister, passes away. I think she's only 24.
Wow.
I understand that there was a podcast that is out there of Anderson Cooper interviewing our president, President Biden, about grief. And at the very beginning of this podcast, they discuss the presidents who have suffered grief. For instance, Lincoln in the loss of his children, and they bring up Jefferson in the loss of so many of his families. In my opinion, are we really thinking about, as we've come more into the conversation, about the Hemings family? Are we thinking about them individually? Jefferson does not leave us very
Right.
much to go on in that regard. He never writes or says anything about Sally Hemings. So what are we to think? What are we to imply? Are they any the less in these affections and concerns? I would like to think, Maggie, that again, that element of respect is universal in his heart, that he holds a respect for every individual. And so therefore, it's up to us, is it not, as interpreters, to know how to answer it more decidedly. It may be easier for me, and I'm not denying that, to remain in the context of exactly what he wrote, to suggest, as I already have, those in his family for which he has the greatest respect. I just cannot help but in myself, based on what he wrote, think that, yeah, I think his wife, and when she passed, was without a question one of the probably the worst day in his life when he lost his wife. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. But you do bring up an interesting point, how he never wrote anything about his relationship with Sally Hemings, his children with Sally Hemings. So that's something that's, and you did say that was one of the questions that you get.
Do you love Sally Hemings?
Yeah.
That is a question that is asked by adults. How do you answer that?
Right.
And when you think about it, for the period of time well, it's just simply a very deep and a very private question to answer.
Yeah. So what do you normally say?
I say, you're asking me. I say to an individual that is asking Mr. Jefferson, I reply in persona, I beg your pardon, but you're asking me about someone who is not here. And I'll often look at whomever asked, and if there appears to be a compatible other or significant other seated next to them, I'll say that's like me asking you about this individual when they're not there. And that's usually in an audience when an audience begins to suddenly have a thought. And I said, in fact, I'm just concerned, as you are asking me, are we really thinking about them? And here's an opportunity at Monticello to go out and meet and acquaint yourself with the Hemings family and with Sally Hemings.
We have another question from Christy, and Christy's asking, do you think Jefferson's last years were happy ones?
Christy, that's equally as difficult a question, and I think I might answer it simply. I think it was the greatest period of challenge in his life, facing, of course, that which he had spent his entire life to create, Monticello and his family, and his work with helping to create our nation and maintaining the principles upon which our nation has been founded, whether these would all continue and succeed. We know he does question this. It's in his writing that he questions this. You know, will our nation survive? What is going to happen with this institution of slavery? Is the idea of Monrovia, Liberia, the deportation of enslaved to create their own nation, is this the answer? He even asks, can we all live together under the same government in our nation? Everything is growing deeper and deeper into debt. Monticello's going into debt. His son-in-law, Thomas Randolph, who is more or less a farm manager overseeing all of the accounts and everything of the farm, we know does welcome Jefferson into the North Pavilion. I think that's where this scenario takes place, and presents to him the facts. And this is November, I believe, 1825, that there appears no way out of the debt short of selling Monticello. I think the eyewitnesses say he looked to the ground and turned his head back and forth, and that he just helped himself, or they helped him out of the chair, out of the pavilion there. And some say that was the beginning of his end. And as he passed away that next summer, July 4th, 1826, that he realized the depth to which everything now had gone at his home. his mountaineering. And so it had to have been a struggle. And yet, look at his extraordinary hope in his last days, in my opinion, truly to extend his life to the 50th anniversary of our Declaration of American Independence. You know, when we question Jefferson's achievements on behalf of our nation and the family of man across the globe, that he wants to be known for three in particular: author of the Declaration, author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. The fact that he is extending his life, and we know that because he requires laudanum in order to dull the pain and to enable him to sleep. And when he wakes up on the second and third, he asks what day it is. And they tell him, right? And then he wakes up on the third, and what does he say? No more laudanum. And then he wakes up on the fourth. Today is the fourth. And he calls his family in and he says, do not grieve for me. The end is near. I go, looks to his daughter, I go where your mother is. This is extraordinary. So I think in the midst of all of what had to be a struggle and despair during that last year, especially, that is incredible hope. And who would deny faith continues to remain? You know, he says faith is not faith without believing.
Indeed. Okay, well, we have, let's go a couple more minutes. We have another question from Chester. We've just kind of been all over the place. These have been great questions. Thank you, everyone. Chester wants to know, after all this time, how much time do you spend studying?
Chester, let's just say there's not a day that goes by where I'm not questioning. I just continue to question, did I get that right? I need to go back and research that, make sure that the next time a question comes up, that I'll have no question. Here is exactly what he said, or within that frame of mind that he might answer it correctly. So yes, Chester, yes, I am continuing to review. I am continuing to seek and learn something new that I might not have known before. I can very safely and securely say he's never boring. He's never boring.
Right.
There's always something new we're learning about him, always a different interpretation of a letter that we might not have thought about before. Always further friendships that he finds significant and influential. I have to say something. The other day, someone came up to me and said, so how does it feel that you have been called a red-headed son of a, and I'll leave that last word, expletive deleted. And I said, what? Oh, yes, you were called that. And I simply replied, well, I've been called many, many things. That doesn't surprise me. Let it come and bring it on, is how I answered. Do you know, I went back to see if that was actually true, and it is a fact.
Really?
It is a fact. You know, Mel, Jefferson saved all of the letters that were written in opposition to him.
Yeah.
The letters that were written to him, calling him every name in the book at that time, which coincidentally, these names are no different than what we are shouting out today in many respects. He saved these denigrations of his character, these, slanders against him. He held a whole, I think, a cache of letters, or at least a scrapbook of that, and someone actually called him that. And I thought,
it's like mean tweets of the
exactly, his tweet book. He had a tweet book in his own time.
Almost like a burn book, too.
Yeah, that's right. So there it is. That's how I can answer to that question.
That's interesting. Well, I wanted to circle back a little bit to like what kids ask you, back to our original topic, questions that kids ask versus adults. Can you talk a little bit about interpreting to kids and some of the questions they ask and how you feel about that?
I love interpreting with children. I really do, because I think children kind of catch it and get into the play with it. I really do. And plus, they're so willing to suspend disbelief and to have a conversation with Mr. Jefferson. And as I was a child and was so taken and absolutely intrigued when I came to Monticello as to who built this, whose house is this? how fascinating this all is. I see that all the time in young children who come to visit Monticello. Do you not? They're absolutely
Yep.
curious and struck with everything about the house. And it's not only the entrance hall with all of the curiosities, but it's weaving in and out of these little intimate corridors and intimate spaces, and the suite of his bed chamber, so to speak, with the writing room and the library, and then the cabinet and the alcove bed and the dressing. I mean, this continues and sustains itself through the entire house. So this curiosity and this intrigue is so welcoming and delightful in conversations with children. And that is the essence of it, to have a conversation with, not to speak down to children, although at times, get down on your knees, and speak with them face to face, come down to their altitude, so to speak, and talk with them. I think that is what children appreciate more than anything else, that, they realize you're an adult, but there's a kind of respect being shown to them when you speak with them. And so that's what I love, and asking them questions.
Yeah, kids love to talk about themselves. Well, as humans, we love to talk about ourselves. So
it's so true.
But I've seen you interpret with kids, and you're fantastic. And I think that's it, just getting down at their level and really, talking to them and listening to them.
I don't know, Mel, you probably don't remember, and you had to have been, just maybe a glint in your father's eye at the time. But I remember the Art Link letter, Kids Say the Darndest Things, and it had one of the highest viewerships for years and years. People would watch this lineup of children seated and an Art Link letter asking them questions. It was a delight. And nonetheless, when you're interpreting first person here at Monticello.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And we have kind of a running joke here in the studio amongst the guides and Hannah that one of our hybrid guides, Chris, will frequently get the question from young children about the privy. They like to know about the bathrooms. But you just never know what they're going to ask you about.
I hear it all the time when I come up by the ice house and you see families going into the privy there, somewhat the outside privy, though it has a door, and they walk in and will turn around and go, Dad, there are about 3 or 4 seats in there. Well, yeah, you're out in the country. Here you're on a farm, so to speak.
That's right. Yep. Those are things they want to know about, the things that are interesting to them, and best friends. And
exactly.
I mean, I remember visiting Monticello in the 80s, and the thing that I took away was like, how did he die? That he died in that bed, in the house. And I remember being like, it's so weird, I mean, it's just the things that you think about as a kid.
That's right, because they're actually seeing the real thing, so to speak. I mean, here it is. This is not a prop. This is not a set. They're seeing that actual bedroom. They're seeing that actual parlor in which so many family weddings occurred, but then so many extraordinary visitors were entertained. And the dining room in the same. It's the actual place, the reality of it. And that registers with young kids. It really does.
It does. And also talking about when you're looking at the actual place, you can talk about the enslaved people and their role in building the house. We say that Jefferson designed the house, but the enslaved people really were the ones building Monticello. So that power of place can give you a sense of how the enslaved people were working and living around there at the time.
And this is what I think we do quite well. When our visitors are coming to visit, from the moment they enter the entrance hall, we're talking about the enslaved who are moving about, who are moving from this room to that one. And we're mentioning who they are and their names. But these are real people like everybody else, moving about and peopling this house, which is again so real and so necessary.
Yes. Yep. An honest history. We want to tell an honest history. Okay. Well, we're hitting our time here. Let me ask one more question from the audience, and then I'll let you end. Julie would like to know what made you want to interpret Thomas Jefferson.
Well, Julie, I can tell you, it was something I never really thought about as something I was made to do or wanted to do, maybe made to do in a sense, because I was always very involved in history and theater. I was a history major in school, but I can never remember being off the stage. I was always in school productions and went on with that. So what do I mean by coming or being made? It is because in 1980, a friend of mine who was a teacher in the Philadelphia school system and taught Pennsylvania history in 4th grade also moonlighted as William Penn. His wife and he would go about the fourth grade classrooms in the Philly public schools dressed as William and Hannah Penn, and breathe history into the history books, so to speak. So he came up to me and simply said, "Did anyone ever tell you you look like Jefferson?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Oh no, they need one at Independence Hall for celebrations and for photo ops." And "Oh, you'd be perfect, Barker." I was tall, thin, gangly. I had long red hair, and so I thought, well, this would be quite a challenge. And so I went down through his introduction, and that's how it all began. And I can only tell you that within the first couple of appearances down there, I was hooked. I was, because why? It was a real set. Independence Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am in persona in Independence Hall. It just breathed that sense of reality to me. And the challenge, the real challenge, you got to get this right. You have to, reply to these questions. It's not simply a photo op. It's not simply that you look alike. That is the point here. And so that's what I can thereby further agree made me take on this challenge more and more. And I just have never looked back. It's been a wonder every single day.
Yeah. And power of place, that just keeps coming up for me. I mean, here at Monticello and interpreting at Monticello, you were at Colonial Williamsburg after Philadelphia. So really like in those spaces where Jefferson would have been.
And you know what else, Mel, too, as I know you've seen, Monticello is a World Heritage Site. Mm-hmm. It's UNESCO, mm-hmm. along with UVA down the road. People are coming here from all over the world, over the world. And they've grown up with the idea of America, the promise. And who exemplifies that to so many people all over the world? Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, which has inspired so many mm-hmm. declarations of independence and new political economies across the globe. During Jefferson's life, he only knew two. The Declaration of Rights in the Citizen, which he collaborated on with General the Marquis de Lafayette, right. mm-hmm. for the French people. And then the other is so profound. The only other one he knew was 1804, the Haitian right. Declaration of Independence as a result of a slave rebellion. So that wonderful power of place is so evident here at Monticello for folks who are coming here to better understand.
Right.
What is this? What does it mean for me and my family and my nation, mm-hmm. where I was born and grew up? As it does still for the United States. So mm-hmm. that's just a great privilege.
It is. And how do people see themselves in this space too? How is it still relevant and then relevant in our history today, and people see themselves here too?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think as Americans, we see ourselves in Jefferson, do we not? We see ourselves in all our contradictions.
Yeah, for good or for bad.
That's right. We do. We certainly do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up, but I did want to give you just kind of the last word on interpreting or some of the questions that you've had. So, is there one that really stands out to you that's different? I know you commented on the one with the little girl asking about her brother, but is there something that's really kind of spoken to you, a question that you've gotten over the years?
I think that little girl's question will continue to resonate in historic interpretation as it continues to resonate for me, because you're put on the spot. Talk about power of place. You're put on the spot and you've got to reply. And I cannot help but think of Jefferson, who makes that statement, simply act, do it.
Yep.
Do it, go forward. I'm thinking of that with respect as we began the conversation about grief and Jefferson's favorite siblings, the favorites in his family, that he'd lost so many. And there it is. You got to go on, continue, move forward. They will always be with you. And I think that's so powerful. So to continue to act, we're facing so many problems today. And we've just got to keep going on and continue to act. And so that, well, what does Shakespeare say? The play's the thing.
And we'll end with that then. Thank you, Bill, for being here with me today and talking about your top questions and a lot of other stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff today. And thank you for joining from home our Monticello live stream. And we will see you with our next Monticello live stream next week. Thanks.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you all. Happy holidays.